Madness is here, everyone. It is Tumalip the podcast, episode number 9. It's official. We have surpassed the old podcast, and I'm very proud of that. Alexander Tumalip joining you here from the closet studio here at St. Francis School. First of all, congratulations. The University of Hawaii men and women are in the NCAA tournament. I just found out about 2 hours ago that the University of Hawaii Rainbow Wahine will be playing UCLA at the Poly Pavilion on Saturday at 12:30. You could probably watch that game on ESPN too, but since ESPN doesn't care about UH, you could probably watch it on the Watch ESPN app. So, with that said, I have in front of me here the entire 68-team field of the 2016 NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Championship Tournament. But, of course, before we get to all that and we get to all the teams that were revealed yesterday, let's go back and figure out what the heck happened to the other teams, the other bubble teams that did not get into the NCAA tournament. So, without further ado, it is that time again for...
It's time for today's opening rant.
There we go. Yes, it is the opening rant. So, I was watching the NCAA tournament selection show yesterday, and of course I have a huge problem with bubble teams, and I have a huge problem, especially with Doug Gottlieb, because of course he seems to like only the good teams, and he doesn't care about the lower seeded teams. I have nothing against that. But the title of the opening rant this month is The Case For. So, here's my case. Yesterday, I saw probably the biggest travesty in the history of the NCAA. The last 4 in projected were Vanderbilt, Wichita State, Michigan, and probably Cincinnati or UConn. I was admittedly shocked that Wichita State and Vanderbilt got in as the last 4 in. But what made me really upset was Tulsa getting in. Now, before I go on that tangent again, here's the thing with Michigan. Do what you want, say what you want, hate on them whatever you want. I don't care that they're 4-12 against the RPI top 50. That's 4 quality wins. And on top of that, they upset number 10 Indiana, the top seed in the Big Ten tourney, in the quarterfinals. I don't know what else you need to get in beyond that. But then, of course, there goes Tulsa. I mean, Tulsa, 2 quality wins. They get blown out twice by Memphis. And they lose to UConn. I don't know where in heaven or earth the NCAA gets the gall to put Tulsa in. And I exactly agree with Doug Gottlieb on that one. How does Tulsa get in, yet St. Mary's and Monmouth is left out? How? There is no way in heaven or earth that Tulsa should replace Monmouth or St. Mary's. And because of that, the bonehead or the boneheads at the NCAA get the goal to put Tulsa in, and now Monmouth and St. Mary's are the top seeds in the NIT as the first 4 teams out. What the hell is Tulsa doing in the NCAA tournament? What is going on? If you're going to take out St. Mary's, or you're going to take out Monmouth, then put someone like a St. Bonaventure. Put a team like maybe Syracuse in. Maybe even Ohio State, Georgia, LSU. Put whatever team you want in, but Tulsa? Come on. I could pick Long Beach State as one of the last 4 in, and they could replace Tulsa. That's how bad this is. The NCAA has gotten so, I don't know how to put it. just gotten so corrupt with putting these so small mid-major schools in, and they leave the big teams out. Randy Bennett, St. Mary's, they won the West Coast Conference regular season title. And yet they still can get over the hump against Gonzaga somehow or some way. And look at Monmouth. Look at their resume compared to everyone else's. Monmouth had 6 quality wins. Tulsa had 2 and then got blown out 3 times. Wake up, selection committee. It's not that obvious. And John Calipari was on Bracketology yesterday, and he said it best. It's a moving target every year. Oh, they've got RPI. Oh, they've got quality wins. Oh, they got quality losses. Oh, they're doing this. Strength of schedule, crap like that. Settle on 1 point and be done with it. Period. The eye in the sky don't lie. It's written in plain black ink. Now that we're off that tangent, as many of you know, today is the bracket day for filling out your brackets. And I have to say, taking a look at this 68 team field, it's pretty challenging. Pretty challenging to pick this year. There are a lot of good teams in this year's tournament. So let's start with the first 4. And we're going to start in the South region. And we're going to start with the 11 seed game between Vandy and Wichita State. So Kevin Stallings and Vanderbilt have like a good amount of experience. And Wichita State still has Ron Baker and Fred Van Vliet. That formidable backcourt against a very weak Vanderbilt backcourt defense, I think Wichita State gets probably the upper hand, but Vanderbilt is going to come out on top in that one. So that's my first pick out of the first 4. Vanderbilt defeats Wichita State. So now moving on to the East Region's games. Florida Gulf Coast against Fairleigh Dickinson. Now, I saw Fairleigh Dickinson play, and let me tell you, they are a very good team. They got a very good backcourt. They got a strong interior defense, and they shut down Wagner because Wagner had a couple of pretty good scorers on their team, and they shut them down pretty good. But then we take a look at Florida Gulf Coast, and then we remember recent history. Florida Gulf Coast, if you remember correctly, they ran all the way to the Sweet 16 back in 2013, and then they proceeded to decleat Georgetown. They made a mess of San Diego State, and then they almost took down Florida in the Sweet 16. So I think experience wins over a little bit more than team effort in this one, and I'm going to say Florida Gulf Coast will advance to the East Regional over Fairleigh Dickinson. So now we come to that controversial game between Michigan and Tulsa. So Michigan defeated Indiana on a buzzer beater at the Big Ten tourney, and Tulsa, those 2 darn good quality wins and 3 or 4 blowouts. I say Michigan beats Tulsa by a good country mile, because there is no way Tulsa's going to be able to keep up with Michigan's backcourt and experience, and I'm going to say that is the deciding factor in that game. So now we come to Holy Cross and Southern. That's the 16 matchup in the West region, and the winner meets Oregon in that one. So Holy Cross and Southern. So Southern has experience, okay? They have really strong interior defense from what I heard, but Holy Cross, the deepest seed to ever win the Patriot League Championship, I have to give them some accolades, but Southern against Holy Cross, that's going to be a pretty good game to watch. But in the end, I'm unfortunately going to have to say that Holy Cross, Malachi Alexander, is a really good player inside, okay? He's really physical, he's a high scorer, and I think he's going to give Southern some real trouble. So in the end, Holy Cross defeats Southern and they advance to the round of 64. So here we go now. Let's start up top with the South Regional. These are first and second round games to be played Thursday, Saturday in Des Moines, Iowa, in the sub-regional pod. They feature the 1 seed Kansas, overall number 1 seed, against the 16th seeded Austin P Governors. And on the other half of the sub-pod is Colorado and Yukon. So, Colorado is one team that Hawaii's seen before. Josh Scott and Askia Booker. Of course, Booker's graduated now. And Josh Scott is a very physical man inside. But we have to keep in mind that Yukon won 4 games in 4 consecutive days. And they might be a little drained, but I think they have a little extra left in the tank. And, you know, seriously, Kansas against Austin P. I'm sorry, but the Governors are going to put up a good fight, but they have no chance in that one. And I'm going to say that Kansas will advance out of that sub-regional pod. And, excuse me, that pen's not working there. I'm going to write it in here. So Kansas will get out of that pod. Oh, hold on a second. I'm going to go grab another pen because apparently these two aren't working. We'll be right back in just a bit. So we probably left you for over a minute there. So we'll get back to that in just a second. So like I said, Kansas basically going to get out of that sub-regional pod easily. So Colorado and Yukon, I have to say Josh Scott against the very good Kevin Ollie guard-related team. Man, that's a tough one to pick, guys. But I'm going to say that Yukon is going to win that one. So moving on down the list, these are first and second round games to be played Friday, Sunday in Spokane, Washington. And they feature Maryland, South Dakota State in the first bracket pod, and the other one features Hawaii and California. So, Maryland against South Dakota State. South Dakota State, the Summit League champions of the tournament. So, I've seen them play. They got some pretty good guard play. They can rotate inside and out. They can beat you with bodies. And I think South Dakota State may give Maryland a little bit of a task, but Melo Trimble, Rashid Suleiman may just be a little bit more than too much, and I think Maryland will advance out of that game. So moving on down the line to California against Hawaii. Now, I'm going to say it now. I'm a bit of a homer. I like Hawaii in this one internally, but I think Tyrone Wallace and Ivan Rabb and Coach Quanzo Martin, they are just too good, I think, and they have a lot less mental lapses than Hawaii has had, and I point that out because Pat Bancardi of ESPN pointed that out in the Friday semifinal against UC Santa Barbara, and I unfortunately, sorry, but I think Cal will advance out of that game against UH. So moving on down the line now, this is first and second round games to be played at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence, Rhode Island, Thursday, Saturday, and they feature Arizona and my pick to win from that first 4 game, Vanderbilt, and of course Miami and Buffalo out of the Mid-American Conference. Buffalo won the Mid-American Conference tournament title for the 2nd consecutive year, and Jim Larinaga and his team from Miami got an at-large bid along with Sean Miller in Arizona. So I think we look at this game, Arizona against Vandy. Now that's a very interesting one. Coach Kevin Stallings against Sean Miller. And historically, Vanderbilt has not done well in first-round games, but they're a lower seed this time, and Arizona's not done so well as a higher seed when they're a 6. So we assume immediately that this could be another case where 11 upsets a 6. Not this time. Arizona advances to the next round in Providence. So, Miami, Florida against Buffalo. That's a very interesting one. Buffalo, very good at guarding people. They can move around. But I think Miami's experience just wears them down a bit in the end. And I think Miami will advance out of that game in Providence. Now, moving on down the line. Friday, Sunday games to be played at Brooklyn at the Barclays Center. And they feature Iowa against Temple and Villanova against UNC Asheville. I'm going to say it right off the top right now. Villanova better watch out because UNC Asheville is hot. They're coming into this on a 5-game winning streak. They can move around bodies, they can bang inside, and they can guard on the perimeter as well. So Ryan Arcidiacono is going to have a tough game. But in the end, Nova will advance to the round of 32 from that one. So now we move on. This is a very interesting one. Fran McCaffrey in Iowa against Fran Dunphy in Temple. This is a very interesting one to watch now because Iowa had a bit of a late season swoon, as Clark Kellogg pointed out yesterday on the selection show, and Temple's coming in very hot. They lost, though, to St. Joseph's in the NCAA, the A10 tournament down in Brooklyn. And they're going back to Brooklyn, so they don't really need to travel that much. So I'm going to take that into account in that game because Temple's going to stay in Brooklyn. They said they're going to stay in Brooklyn, and they're playing against Iowa. And I think that Temple may just slightly have an advantage in that game. And I'm going to go with the Temple Owls to take down Iowa in that game. So now, moving on to the Sweet 16 in the South region, Kansas against UConn. So with Tab Boyle and the UConn out of the way, Perry Ellis, I think, is going to have a field day on UConn, and Kansas is going to easily advance into the Sweet 16 there, if they could survive the first weekend. So, Maryland against Cal. Now, that's a very interesting matchup in that Spokane sub-regional final. So, Maryland, I think, is just going to run out of gas because they have to travel. They're traveling all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina, all the way over to Spokane, Washington. I think the travel is going to finally catch up with them, and I think Cal is just a little bit more talented than Maryland, and I'm going to say Cal will make it to the Sweet 16 in that one. So now, moving on down the line, Arizona, Miami, Temple, Nova. So Arizona against Miami. I think experience definitely wins here. Jim Larinaga and his team, what a job he's done over in Miami. But Sean Miller and Caleb Tarzuski definitely have something to say about that. I'm going to say Zona is going to move on to the Sweet 16 in Louisville, Kentucky. So, moving on down the line. Nova against Temple, another Big 5 matchup there. That's a very interesting one to watch. And Temple against Nova. Now, that's an interesting one to watch. Fran Dunphy against Jay Wright. I think Ryan Arcidiacono might go off in that game. But then again, Temple has something to say about that too. But I think experience just does win out. And I'm going with Nova in the Sweet 16. So Zona Nova and Kansas Cal in the Sweet 16. So now we move on to the tough part. Picking the teams who's going to go to the South Regional Final. Nova can shoot. Arizona is physical. But we remember recent history. Arizona was 1 second away from going to the Final Four just 4 years ago. And I think, but Villanova definitely has something to say about that. I think Nova wins, and they're going to the Elite Eight in Louisville at the KFC Yum Center in Louisville, Kentucky. So Kansas against California. That's two very talented teams. Perry Ellis, Frank Selden against Tyrone Wallace and Ivan Rabb and Cal. I think that's going to be a real big shootout there in Louisville, Kentucky. But unfortunately, I think Kansas will just slip by in that one, and they will make it to the Elite Eight. So the South Regional Final pits Nova against Kansas. And I think in that one, it's going to be very interesting because Daniel Ochefu, Josh Hart, and Ryan Arcidiacono against Perry Ellis and Frank Mason. That's going to be a very interesting one. I think experience wins, and Kansas will make it to its 17th Final Four in school history. So now, moving on down the line to the Anaheim Regional. First and second round games to be played Friday, Sunday in Spokane, Washington. They feature Oregon against my pick to win the first four. Holy Cross out of the Patriot League. They'll be the first team in with 19 losses in school history, and that's not even going to be close in that one. Oregon is definitely going to win that one, and they are going to easily advance to the round of 32. And then St. Joe's against Cincinnati, an automatic berth against an at-large berth against an at-large berth. I think St. Joe's may just have a little bit of an edge up on Cincinnati in that one because of their physical play inside, and I'm going to say that St. Joe is going to move on to the next round in that one. So now, first and second round games to be played in Providence, Rhode Island, March 19th and 17th. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I'm going to have a tough time picking this one. Baylor against Yale. Now, I've seen Baylor play Scott Drew. They can sustain a zone. They can't sustain a zone, as I know, for a very long time. And they're going to do it against Makai Mason at the point for Yale. I'm going to say, because this is a 5-12 matchup, another upset's going to take place here. And Yale is going to pull off one of the big shockers of the tournament. And as we know in previous years, Harvard upset Cincinnati, and they also upset New Mexico in the first round a couple of years ago. So I'm going to say recent history belongs to Yale's side, and they are going to pull off the big upset in that one. So moving on down the line to the UNC Wilmington Duke game. That's the first game up on Thursday at 6:15 a.m. Hawaii time, 12:15 p.m. Eastern time. So Duke is a very short bench, and Grayson Allen and Luke Kennard are basically their only two guys who can get it done for Duke. So I'm going to say at this point, they're going to win over UNC Wilmington by a hair, but something's going to happen in the next round that I'm going to have to address. So, moving on down, these are first and second round games to be played Friday, Sunday in Oklahoma City at the old Ford Center, and they feature Texas against Northern Iowa and Texas A&M against Green Bay. The winners of the H to the O to the R O wins of the H to the O R I Horizon League. I don't know how to say that. That's like getting a little bit on my nerves. I don't know how to say that fully now. So, Texas against Uni. Now that's a really interesting game. Shaka Smart playing against Ben Jacobson and Northern Iowa. I think Wes Washburn might have a game in that one because Texas cannot defend very well, and they cannot sustain a zone for very long. So I'm going to say that Northern Iowa is going to move on in Oklahoma City, and then Texas A&M is just going to have a field day with Green Bay. I don't even know why I need to talk about that game right there. So that's Oklahoma City. And the next one from Oklahoma City features Oregon State, VCU, and Oklahoma, Cal State, Bakersfield. For the second half of that sub-regional pod, I don't know why I'm saying Cal State Bakersfield's name. Oklahoma's just going to have a field day with them. No surprise with that one. And then Oregon State, VCU. Now, that's a really interesting one. GP2 against a very good shooting VCU team, as always, Bradford Burgess. He's a senior now, and he's looking for redemption as a fifth-year senior. So, that's a very tough game to pick again because Oregon State has very good guards and very good forwards and very good interior defense, but VCU has experience. VCU has experience, and last year they upset Ohio State in the first round. So I'm going to stick with my gut here and say that VCU is going to advance out of that bracket. So now let's move on to the Sweet 16 here. Oregon against St. Joe's. This is really tough to pick because Oregon cannot sustain a zone for long the whole game against the very good shooting St. Joe's team. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the first number one to go down in the first of the NCAA tournament. St. Joseph's will pull off the upset of Oregon in the first round because Oregon cannot sustain the zone, and St. Joe's is a very good shooting team. I give Oregon less of a chance in that one. Now, this is a very, very interesting one to talk about. Yale against Duke. Duke has a very, very short bench. Against Makai Mason and Yale, boy, this is a tough one to pick, but I'm going to say that Duke is going to advance by just a nose over Yale, as long as it pains me to say it. But that's how far Duke is going to go, in my opinion. And then Texas A&M is just going to have a field day with Northern Iowa. And then Oklahoma is just going to run over VCU. So that's an easy pick for me. And so now we come to the Sweet 16 in Anaheim, California on March 26th. Now travel is going to really catch up with Duke here. And St. Joe's, maybe, I'm going to say, may run out of gas near the end. And they're going to advance over St. Joe's. And they're going to end their Cinderella run into the Sweet 16. And then Texas A&M against Oklahoma. And that's going to be a really good one to watch. Oklahoma against Texas A&M. I'm going to say Oklahoma advances out of that by just a thin hair over Texas A&M, and then Oklahoma's just gonna have a field day with Duke. And here is my opinion of why they're gonna have a field day with Duke. Number one, Duke is a very short bench, and they don't rotate in a lot of players. If they do depend on somebody, it's normally Luke Kennard or Grayson Allen. They don't rely on Plumlee much, and they also don't rely on Brandon Ingram a lot. But he does knock down shots from time to time. With that said, though, I say Oklahoma has a better chance because they're more efficient offensively, and they move inside, and they get Ryan Spangler and Kadeem Latin go up and down, north-south. So up and down the floor they go, and that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. But Oklahoma is the one to advance to the Final Four for me from the West Regional. So, moving on now to the right upper quadrant of the bracket, the East Regional, hosted by North Carolina. And they're going to have a field day with Florida Gulf Coast and Fairleigh Dickinson. Now this comes to this matchup, USC against Providence. Andy Enfield against Chris Dunn and Ben Bento. Now, I'm going to give the edge to Providence in this one because you have two perennial Big East players of the year, and they are definitely probably the best guard and forward combination in all of college basketball today. And they are going to have a field day with Andy Enfield and USC, and they're going to end their reign very early. Now that comes to Des Moines, Iowa. These games to be played Thursday, Saturday at the Wells Fargo Arena, hosted by Iowa State. Indiana, Chattanooga, the first matchup. Kentucky, Stony Brook, the next matchup in that region. So, I think Indiana may have a tough time with Chattanooga in this one because Chattanooga can move bodies. They can move bodies efficiently inside and out, and I really think that they will have a tough time. Tom Crean's team, though, will find a way as they always do, and they will advance into the second round of the tournament. So, Kentucky against Stony Brook, again, tough game for Kentucky. They can move bodies inside Stony Brook, and I think they'll deal with it very professionally, and the only way they can, they will come out on top barely at the last second. So, now we move down to the next matchup. This is the first and second round games to be played Friday, Sunday in Brooklyn, New York. And this is Notre Dame against Michigan. The legendary rivalry continues on the court, and West Virginia takes on the Lumberjacks of Stephen F. Austin. So, Notre Dame, Mike Bray's team is very tough. I watched them play North Carolina, and they played them tough all the way to the end. And I think they fully deserve an at-large bid, definitely over Tulsa. But maybe not over Michigan, just by a hair. But I think the guard play in Notre Dame and the physical interior defense is going to be good enough for them to get into the second round of the tourney over Michigan. So now that brings us to West Virginia against Stephen F. Austin. We had two upsets last year in 3-14 matchups. Georgia State upset Baylor, and UCLA upset UAB. So, with that, keeping that in mind, I'm going to say that West Virginia will escape with this for now, and they will advance to the second round because they have better guard play than Stephen F. Austin does, and they're very unselfish, which means they share the ball around the perimeter, and I think they will have a bit of a slight advantage over Stephen F. Austin in that regard. So now moving on to first and second round games to be played Friday, Sunday in St. Louis, Missouri. Wisconsin takes on Pittsburgh, and Xavier takes on Weber State. I'm going to say it already. Xavier's going to have a field day with Weber State. I don't know why I'm picking that game. But Pittsburgh against Wisconsin. Now, that's kind of an interesting one because Wisconsin's coming off a tumultuous year where Bo Ryan retired suddenly, and then Jamie Dixon and Pittsburgh, excuse me, they're always here in the tournament. I mean, it's like a mainstay for them to be in the tournament. I think I'll give them the advantage, or I'll give Pitt the advantage over Wisconsin, and they will advance to the next round of the tournament. So now moving on to the Sweet 16 in that bracket. First one for them, UNC takes on Providence in the first round of the tourney. And so here's the situation with Providence. Providence can move bodies, and they're unselfish. North Carolina can do the same. But here's the thing with North Carolina. They shoot more, and they pass the ball more when they have to, but they shoot more from the outside, which gives them a strong advantage on that, and I'll give them the likelihood to advance over Providence. Indiana, Kentucky in the same bracket as Doug Gottlieb screamed on Selection Sunday. Now, here's the thing with Indiana. They play very well. They shoot from the outside very well, but Kentucky has Tyler Ulis, and I failed to mention his name in that first matchup against Stony Brook. I think Tyler Ulis is going to be the difference in that game, and I think North Carolina and Kentucky will meet again in the Sweet 16 in Philadelphia. So now moving on to the bottom half of the bracket now. Notre Dame against West Virginia and Pitt against Xavier. I think Xavier is going to have a field day against Pittsburgh, and they're going to advance to the Sweet 16. Notre Dame, West Virginia, that's a tougher one because Mike Bray's team can shoot from the outside, and they can also shoot inside as well. But West Virginia can press you and defend better than Notre Dame can. I don't think Notre Dame can handle the pressure that well, so because of that, I'm going to say West Virginia will advance to the Sweet 16 over Notre Dame. So now let's move on to the Sweet 16 matchups. North Carolina, Kentucky, the rivalry continues between Roy Williams and John Calipari. And Tyler Ulis against Marcus Page, Justin Jackson, and Bryce Johnson. I think that threesome is going to work wonders for North Carolina, and they will advance to the Elite Eight over them. Then West Virginia against Xavier. Chris Mack and his team love to shoot from the outside, and they love to move bodies inside. West Virginia, though, presses and defends a lot better, I think, and they have the more significant advantage over Xavier in that regard, and I'm going to say West Virginia is going to go to the Elite Eight in that region. And then North Carolina gets West Virginia. I don't think West Virginia has much of a chance in that game, even though they press a little bit harder than North Carolina can. But recent memory, 6 years ago, West Virginia used that pressure to their advantage, and they went to the Final Four. So West Virginia will go to the Final Four from the East region. So now, moving on to the final bracket. Virginia in the Midwest region, they are the 1 seed, and they are just going to have a field day against Hampton. That one's not even going to be a contest. Texas Tech against Butler. Now, Hawaii saw Texas Tech earlier in the season. Devontae Williams. Yeah, that kid can play. He's got some skills in that regard. And Chris Holtman and Butler. Remember when they said they weren't going back to the NCAA tournament? They've gone to the NCAA tournament now 2 years in a row since Brad Stevens left for the NBA. I think they are going to have an advantage in that regard. And I pick them to advance over Texas Tech. So now moving on to the first of the 2 Denver sub-pods. This is the first one to be played Thursday-Saturday. And they feature the Purdue Boilermakers against the Little Rock Trojans and Iowa State taking on Iona in that regional pod. So now, this is a very interesting one. Purdue against Little Rock. I think Purdue holds a slight advantage because Isaac Haas and A.J. Hammonds can really do some damage inside. And I think against an undersized Little Rock team, I think they can actually make some noise here in that game, and they'll advance out of that game. So the next one, Iowa State against Iona. Georges Niang and Iona. But up and down they go. There's going to be a really good chance that both teams are going to get tired, and it may get a little sluggish because Denver is a mile high above. They're playing at the Pepsi Center in Denver, which is a mile high off the ground in elevation. So with that being said, I give Iona a very slight advantage, but my gut tells me to go with Iowa State, but I'm going to go guns blazing here and say Iona is going to advance out of that game into the round of 32. So now we move down to the second Denver pod. Seton Hall against Gonzaga in one, and Utah and Fresno State in the other one. Utah and Fresno State. Jakob Poeltl, one of the best big men we've seen in college basketball all year, according to CBS's Doug Gottlieb, against Marvell Harris. But I think size matters in this game. Jakob Poeltl is 6'11", and the next closest player to him on Fresno State's team is 6'9.5". So I'm going to give Utah the advantage in that one, and Marvell Harris and Fresno are going to be tired by the end of that game in that one. So now Seton Hall against Gonzaga. That's a very interesting one. The Big East champions taking on the West Coast Conference champs. So Seton Hall has not done a good job in advancing in tournaments in the past. So I'm going to give Gonzaga the edge in this one because of their experience. And I think they're going to have a real problem with Domantas Sabonis and Kyle Wiltshire. And I don't think Isaiah Whitehead is going to get free a lot in this game because Mark Few's team knows how to lock down from the perimeter. So I'm going to put Gonzaga in that matchup against Utah in the round of 32. So Dayton against Syracuse. Well, first Michigan State, Middle Tennessee. I'm just going to advance Michigan State already because that's not even going to be close. And then... Dayton against Syracuse. Now, by the way, this is first and second round games we play Friday, Sunday in St. Louis, Missouri at the Scott Trade Center. So first of all, Syracuse should not be here first off because they lost to St. John's, and honestly, I agree with Doug Gottlieb. Nobody that lost to St. John's should be in this tournament, really. So I'm gonna say that Dayton advances because Archie Miller's team knows how to press. They use their guards well. They move their bodies inside, and on top of that, they also shoot well from the perimeter, which should be taken into account in that game. So now we move on to the round of 32. Virginia against Butler, Purdue against Iona, Gonzaga, Utah, Dayton, Michigan State University. So now Virginia against Butler, you might as well play that one in the dark, Doug Gottlieb said, and I agree with him. There's probably not going to be a lot of offense in that game because Malcolm Brogdon is not only a very good shooter and a scorer, he's also a very good defender, and so is Butler's Kellen Dunham. So I think the defenses are really going to dominate in that one, but I think just barely, and I know some people are going to go crazy with this one, I think Butler is going to advance to the Sweet 16 in Chicago. So that's another number one seed that goes down. The third one now to go down. So at least have one top seed in the Final Four, and that'll be Kansas. So now Purdue against Iona, that's boring. Purdue's going to have a field day on Iona. They're going to advance to the Sweet 16 easy. Gonzaga against Utah. Boy, that's a tough one to pick. I think Mark Few's team is just going to get a little bit tired near the end because of the altitude, and Utah is going to have and Jakob Poeltl is going to dominate Domantas Sabonis inside. Kyle Wiltshire is going to get held down on the perimeter, and I think Utah is going to advance to the Sweet 16 in Chicago. Dayton against Michigan State. Now, this is extremely interesting. Recent history. Dayton upset Ohio State. They upset Boise State. They upset Providence. And they almost upset Florida a couple of years ago. So, gut tells me to stick with Dayton in this one, folks, because I think UD is riding a huge wave of momentum coming into the A-10, and I think they have the opportunity to take down Utah and face Butler or Purdue. Speaking of that game, Butler against Purdue in that regional semifinal, I think A.J. Hammonds and Isaac Haas are just going to be a little bit too much in the end for Kellen Dunham and co., and they will advance to the regional final in Chicago. So Utah against Dayton, I think Dayton's going to do a little bit better shooting from the perimeter, but Jakob Poeltl, again, he might have a field day on that interior defense because Dayton is severely undersized, so Utah will advance out of that region to the final. So now Purdue against Utah. Everybody thinks it's going to be Virginia against Michigan State in the regional final. Not so fast, I say, because Utah can shoot. Excuse me. Purdue can score inside. It's going to be a great battle between Jakob Poeltl and Isaac Haas. But A.J. Hammonds, I think, is going to be the main X factor in this one because Utah doesn't have anybody else that could shoot from the outside as well as he can to score inside. So Purdue will advance to the Final Four out of the Midwest region. So now we've set our national Final Four. Kansas, Oklahoma, West Virginia against Purdue on the other half of the bracket. So, West Virginia against Purdue. I think West Virginia's press is just going to beat out Purdue by just a smidge, and the West Virginia Mountaineers, will advance to the national championship game. And Kansas against Oklahoma, round number 3. Buddy Hield against Perry Ellis, Jordan Woodard against Frank Mason, and Isaiah Cousins and Buddy Hield versus basically the rest of that team. And I think for the first time ever, we are going to have an all Big 12 final because Kansas experience will edge out Buddy Hield, who will have another monster game by just a smidge, and they will play for yet another national championship. And then Kansas against West Virginia, two teams that'll refuse to lose in that game. I strongly think that the Kansas Jayhawks will be your national champions in 2016 because West Virginia's press defense is not going to be able to contain Kansas's Perry Ellis, and they will not be able to get back fast enough to cover the shooting Frank Mason, who can just shoot the lights out from the perimeter. So just to recap, Final Four, Kansas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Purdue, national championship, West Virginia, Kansas, and Kansas is my national champion in 2016. So, happy Bracket Monday, everybody. We'll release this hopefully beginning of the first four tomorrow. Now I gotta go work on my other stuff for school. I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time by yapping. Happy March Madness, everybody. We'll see you next month in April. Bye-bye.